Hello and good morning. We'll start by 11:35 a.m. So kindly bear with us.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mansuri, Mahi, Nisha, Sahil. Good morning to you all. Good morning, Vinit. Good morning, all. We'll start in just 2 minutes. Kindly wait. Gomanna Sai Krishano, you there?
Yes, yes, sir. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Where are you from? Where are you from, Gomanna?
I'm from Hyderabad, sir. Call me Kushla.
Okay, Krishna.
Yes, sir.
Hyderabad. Okay. You have come long way studying Nila College, Pune.
Yes, sir.
Mansi, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Where are you from, Mansi?
Sir, Kanpur.
Kanpur, UP.
Yes,
How is
sir.
the situation there now?
So people are not following rules as much, but it's all right. I mean, lockdown is there. From morning 7 to 11, the shops are open, and then all the time it's.
Because I guess UP is the worst affected states now,
Yes, sir.
but still
So,
Maharashtra is also in the list.
but now after like past few weeks, Maharashtra has come to a stable position. That's what I've heard.
I don't know they're saying it, but I don't see it because I think they're hiding the numbers, I guess. So I'm not really sure what to do because I'm still hearing the ambulance sirens like anything every day. So I hope your state and your situation over there in your state remains stable. All of you. Is there anybody from apart from UP, Maharashtra, and Hyderabad, of course? No. Anybody from Delhi?
Yes, sir.
Garima, you are from Delhi.
Yes, sir.
There is a lot of problems going on right now in Delhi.
Yes, sir. For oxygen beds and everything.
Mhm. I think it will take more 4 or 5 days to bring the situation to the normal. But it's still time, I guess.
Yes, sir. The cases for like today, like for 24 hours, they have dropped a little, but then it'll take some more time.
Mm-hmm. That's good then. Anyway, you guys, please take care, stay safe, stay strong, don't go out. Anyway, should we begin? Now I think it's 11:35. Uh, Let us start the class, okay? So I welcome all of you once again to the class of Public International Law. Actually, the states in general is one of the important unit again in your syllabus, and it was supposed to be covered by the other madam, but as she won't be available, I don't know for how long. So it is my duty to take the states in general topic first because it is a very subject of international law. And if you don't understand the state in itself, you won't be understanding what do you mean by. You see, there's so many other topics ahead. So it's very much important for you to understand what do you mean by the states in general because at in while we deal so, we will be dealing with the definitions, classifications, rights and duties of the state. I'm sure that the students who are there from the BA class, they must have and they must have an idea before when they studied the state subject in their political science subject. However, from the BBA group, I don't expect anybody to know the concept of state because mostly in BBA there are the management subject. However, this is not the case with the BA people. BA people must have already studied the states in their political science subject. However, we will have a look at the states. What do you mean by the states, the classifications, and the rights and duties of the state from the point of view of public international law? Because from the day one, we are saying that international law is a law that deals with the relationship between the states primarily. And then we have also seen that then, due to the evolution of the time and the practices of the state, states are not the only subject of international law. Nowadays, even international organizations, to some extent, they are also the part of international law. So, uh, as again, we have seen that the states are the prime and the major subject of international law. It becomes our duty to know what do you mean by states exactly. So we will be covering some of the definitions, classifications, and what are the different kinds of states, and when exactly you can call a particular entity a state, and when you cannot. Okay, so states are the primary subject of international law. In fact, international law is the law of states, law of nations. So the state means nations, country. You can use these terms interchangeably. And at the same time, it is very much difficult to define the term state in international law. Okay, so when it comes to defining the state, it is very much difficult for the other nations because many of the time it becomes a matter of political interference, okay, and political ideology. So it's very much difficult to define the state. However, the general terms, general definitions have been given. The great jurist Salmon, he said that state is nothing but a community of people which has been established for some objective, such as internal order and external security. So it is a community of people, as per Salmon, which has some objectives, and those objectives are majoritarily internal order and maintenance of external security, or maintenance of law and order in plain words, right? And then uh, this is another definition which means that the state is a society which is politically organized and its members are bound with each other by being under some central authority, and most of the people automatically follow the rules of this central authority. So again, like Austin, this definition talks about being bound each other under some central authority. If you remember Austin's definition of law, he said that law is the command of sovereign followed by sanction. So the command of sovereign element can be seen in the definition propounded by Lawrence, right? So he said that the state is a society generally which is politically organized, and its members are bound by the central command, central authority, and most of the people automatically follow the rules of this particular authority. Then our public international law jurist Oppenheim again appears here, and he also provides the definition of his own version. He says that the existence of a state is possible only when people of state have settled under the highest government authority and habitually follow its orders. So it is nothing but when people come together and they settle themselves, they establish one authority and they pledge themselves to follow the rules and regulations established by the particular authority. They pledge themselves to observe the and respect whatever has been propounded by this authority. Then it could be said as state. However, all these definitions do not give us what we exactly want. And as a result, as per Article 1 of Montevideo Convention 1932, which deals with primarily with the relations to the rights and duties of the state, it says that the state, as a person of international law, should possess the following qualification. So, Article 1 of Montevideo Convention, or in fact, Montevideo Convention 1932, which deals with the rights and duties of the state, it does not define exactly what do you mean by state. However, it says that a state, as a person of international law, should possess the following qualification. So instead of definitions, it is very much interesting that the Montevideo Convention 1932 does provide for some qualification, which means if any entity you will call a state in international law, then that entity must have these four characteristics. These are the basic fundamental elements before you can call any entity a state. So number one is permanent population. A state must have a permanent population. Now, the question arises, for permanent population, how much population is required? Plain answer is it depends upon the geographical situations. It depends on the geographical capacity of that particular state, territory of that particular state, and there is no state jacket formula so far as to determine the permanent population. However, it could be small in number, it could be great in number, it doesn't matter at all. Okay, but however, the population leaving that particular territory or state so must be permanent in nature. Okay. Second characteristics of a particular state is a defined territory. So there should be a territory which must belong to that state, and that territory must be a defined territory. If the territory is not defined, then boundary disputes are bound to be there in international law. Like for example, we often and again, we have the disputes with Pakistan over the boundary. We have the dispute with China over the territory, just because some of the territories are not being defined properly. So there must be a defined territory which will clearly, you see, mark the boundaries and limitations of that particular state. So a defined territory as second characteristic. Then the third one, which is again very much important, is a government. The state must have a government. The government, the form of the government could be presidential form of government, it could be parliamentary form of government. It does not matter. However, a government must be there if you want to call a particular entity a state in international law. Now, apart from all these three above, the most important aspect, the most important element which gives the true identity to the state in international law is the state must have capacity to enter into relationship with other states. This is very much important, which means a capacity to enter relationship with other states means the state must be supreme, the state must be sovereign, and the state must be powerful enough to enter into relationship with the other state, to deal with other states, and to decide its own internal affairs, and to deal with it, to decide with its own foreign policy. So here are these four elements of the state. If you want to call a particular entity a state, these four characteristics, these four qualifications must be there: permanent population, a defined territory, a government, and last not the least is the capacity to enter into relationships. If the state does not have a capacity to enter into relationship with other state, if the state does not have that much power, then that entity could not be called as state in international law, right? So this fourth one is very much important. Even if you have these three, permanent population, defined territory, and a government, and if you don't have the fourth one, then your state is not a free state. Okay, some other state must be exercising authority over your own state. Okay, so please bear this in mind. There are four qualifications of the state. Then we have just seen this essentials of a state. Then we'll come to the classification of the state, which is again another important topic in your syllabus from the examination point of view. Then you can divide the states in three categories, or in other words, states can be classified under these three categories. One is sovereign state. These sovereign states are usually fully sovereign states, and the second one is not fully sovereign states. Third one is non-typical states. Now, the states, the status of under international law of the state is only that of the sovereign state, not fully sovereign state. Yes, there are non-typical states which also bear authority in international law, which we'll see very soon in the next slide. Then what do you mean by the sovereign states? Sovereignty means the supremacy. Supremacy means the independence, and which automatically implies the principle or the doctrine of non-interference, which means a state must be supreme, independent, and it should be free from any kind of interference by any other state. If the state, for example, Pakistan tomorrow cannot dictate India about the terms of any any international treaty, or they cannot point out that look, whatever is happening in our country to the before the international community, because that's our internal affair. Okay, so the principle of non-interference is the customary rule of international law. No state can interfere into the domain of the other state, and sovereignty means you have absolute and illimitable sovereignty, which means you are free to do whatever you want in your state. However, your sovereignty is always limited sovereignty. You are supreme within the domain allotted to you only. You cannot dictate and boost in international law that you are the supreme state and all the other states must listen to you. This cannot be done. So even if you are sovereign within the domain allotted to you by the international community members. Even if you are supreme, then you are supreme and independent only within the domain allotted to you. Only only to the territory to which you belong, right? Not beyond that. So in that sense, the absolute and illimitable sovereignty is not allotted generally to any of the state, no matter how powerful a state may be. And as a result, the sovereignty is limited. And these sovereign states are primarily, majoritarily, are the nations or the states under international law. Then, more particularly, we'll see not fully sovereign states. These cannot be termed as states in its true sense under international law. Why? Because though they have all the first three qualifications of being called a state, they do not have the fourth qualification, which is capacity to enter into relationship with another state. So by some reason or the other, all these states remain under the authority of some other state, except the federal state. Now we'll see one by one what do you mean by these protectorate states, vassal states, federal states, commonwealth states, associated states, and the trust territories. First thing first, protectorate states. It says that when one state surrenders itself by an agreement embodied in a treaty, the administration of certain important international affairs to the protection of another state, a kind of relationship is established between the two states, which is known as the protectorate state. So there is these two concepts that may arise. One is protecting state, the states which protects, and second is the protectorate state, the state which is being protected by the protecting state, right? So when one state protects another, the another state which is being protected is called protectorate state under international law. And there may be different shades of protection. Protection can be of different kinds. For example, the protecting state may decide that look, we will take care of your international foreign policy, education, and external affairs. Apart from that, you're free to do whatever you want to do. So this kind of protection. However, in this situation, the protectorate state is not usually able to deal with other states other than the protecting state. So the protecting state again becomes a very much important so far as the domain of protectorate state is concerned. So there may be different shades of protection. It all depends on the terms of treaty or agreement. Usually, the protectorate state or the state which calls for help from the other state, they usually enter into an agreement, and whatever kind of relationship this protecting state as well as the protectorate state will have will be decided upon the terms of the agreement or the provisions of the treaty, which these two states might enter into. Then protectorate states usually, as I said, they are not sovereign. However, so apparently, prima facie, they are independent and possessor of all rights, which have not been surrendered to the protecting state by virtue of an international treaty or an agreement to that kind, right? Then this was the first kind. Then we'll see Bhutan as the protectorate state as an example. Okay, so there was a treaty of friendship concluded on 8th August 1949 between India and Bhutan, by virtue of which Bhutan became the protectorate state of India. Then Article 3 provided that no interference from India into internal administration of Bhutan, and India's advice in external affairs and relations of Bhutan was agreed by this agreement. Also, the clauses of the agreement were also provided for import of arms and ammunition and other warlike materials, but no export. So this was also one of the kind of restriction that India put on Bhutan, that they can import the arms and ammunition and warlike materials, but they cannot export out of you see Bhutan. Annual subsidy of 5 lakh rupees was also being provided. Remember, we are talking about the year 1949. So 5 lakh rupees meant a lot money that during that particular time. However, in 1971, Bhutan was admitted to the United Nations organization with India's full support. And contrary, even if we had supported then Bhutan so much, but you see, Bhutan has acted contrary to the interests of India, and became signatory to Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT). And also recently, if you remember, Bhutan has casted a negative vote, dissenting vote in the UN Security Council against the India's permanent membership to the UNSC, right? So the states to which we protect, sometimes they act against our interests. Then the second category, if you remember, was vassal states. Vassal states are nothing but the states which remains under the suzerainty of another state, is called vassal state. Okay. Uh, Again, it has no capacity to enter into relationship with other states. Suzerain states, vassal states are also known by the name of suzerain state. Okay, so the control mainly remains under the parent state, which takes control of suzerain state. All treaties concluded by suzerain state are automatically binding on the vassal state, which means the parent state, whatever the decision treaties have been concluded, these vassal states are bound to follow the same. No sovereignty at all is being provided to the vassal states. They remain at the mercy of the suzerain states only. And in case of war, vassal states automatically become the parts of the party, becomes party to the suzerain states. Then we can have Tibet as an example, as a vassal state of China. Tibet was an independent state till 1720, and after the end of Manchu dynasty in China, Tibet became free from China and entered into treaty with other states. In 1907, Tibet was brought under the joint protection of China and Britain. You see, there was a time Britain literally ruled every part of every inch of the world. So Tibet was no exception at all. So it was brought under the joint protection of China and Britain, and in 1913, Tibet proclaimed its independence because there was the presence of Britishers that time. Then Shimla Agreement was finalized in the year 1914, which boosted the Tibet's autonomy under China. However, on 7th October 1950, Dalai Lama demanded UN protectorate over Tibet. However, the United Nations refused, citing that it is the internal matter of Tibet and China. So we cannot help you. Sorry. And finally, a treaty 1951 was concluded between Dalai Lama and China, wherein it was agreed that China would not interfere into the internal administration of Tibet. However, Tibet ceased to be a vassal state as China violated the treaty. It means China wrongfully interfered into the internal administration of Tibet and somehow got control of Tibet, and it got mixed up with the China now. So that's the reason in the year 1959, Dalai Lama fled from Tibet and sought asylum in India. Since then, Tibet is in full control of China. Do you know where Dalai Lama has sought asylum in India? Where Dalai Lama is located in India? Any idea? No idea. Anyway, we'll go just forward. Then Indian princely states were also one of the prominent examples of vassal states. 562 Indian princely states had no international status and were the vassal states of Great Britain. India, in fact, completely was a vassal state wherein there was no sovereignty. And British, when Britain went on to fight World War One and World War Two, not World War One exactly, but World War Two, Indian soldiers were also the part of the British Army. So this was ended in 1947 when India declared itself as an independent and sovereign nation. Next one is, which we all know, is the federal. A federal state is a union of states which has organ of its own, is invested with the power not only over the member state but also over their citizens, right? So India is having a quasi-federal system of states or the government. The perfect, rigid, and strict example of federalism, if you want to see, it is the US of A, right? And then there is another category, it's called Commonwealth state. These are usually the organization of such states which were once colonized by the Britishers. So it is an association of free and equal states who believe and recognize in certain common principles. That's why it's known as Commonwealth of Nations, an association independent of independent sovereign states, all of which have been at one time British territories. Formerly, it was also called as British Commonwealth of Nations. Subsequently, the word British was dropped, and there are several benefits of the membership. If you are a member of the Commonwealth state, for example, in economic and military, political, military, etc. affairs, you can get assistance from these Commonwealth nations. Right? So it's you have its own perk if you are a member of the Commonwealth nations. Then there is a category of associated states as well. Associated states have a large measure of autonomy in internal affairs and possess the right to secede in accordance with the special procedures. However, the terms of agreement it differs. We'll also see the example of associated states um, in the form of Sikkim. Sikkim formerly was an associated state of India. On 2nd September 1974, constitutional 36th Amendment Bill was introduced in Lok Sabha to make Sikkim as an associated state. However, immediately after 1 year, the status of Sikkim ended as an associated state because finally it merged with India itself in the year 1975. So next one is the trust territories. These are also one of its kind territories, which was established mainly under the League of Nations, which means after the First World War, many territories came before the international scene whose political institutions were not sufficiently developed so as to make them independent. Which means there were so many territories where there was no political system, no social system. These territories were left alone like anything. So there came the UN mandate. Such territories under the administration of other states, the UN started to give, mostly the League of Nations it started to give to some of the states in trust. Okay, so it is the mandate of the League of Nations, and now UNO trusteeship council and trusteeship system is still there, but there now it is of no use because almost every state is now very much independent, and they have their political, social, and economical system well established. Initially, after World War II, 11 territories were placed under the trusteeship system, but now you see we have very much limited use of the trusteeship council as well as the trusteeship system. Then these are the non-typical states. If you remember, I've told you that there are three kinds of states. One is the sovereign state, second is the non-fully sovereign state, and third one is the not typical state. These are in the form of usually the cities and smaller states. However, they have full autonomy, they have full presence under the international law. So, number one is the Holy See, which means Vatican City. If you see, only you will find membership of 1,000 or 500 people living in the Vatican City. Still, it is a city like Trieste also. It is just a city, but still it has the status of state under international law. Then you have the neutralized states. Neutralized states are those states, suppose where there is a war going on in between two or more states. These states say that, look, whatever is going on in the international community, we would not like to be a part because we are the neutral state. We won't help that state. We won't help you as well. So kindly leave us and kindly excuse us from participation or from taking favors in favor of any of the states. So the examples of neutralized states are Switzerland and Austria, which during the World War II remained, and even one remained neutral. They said that we have nothing to do with whatever is going on. And last not the least, in non-typical state is the free cities. Trieste is one of the best example of the free cities, and the Trieste, Vatican also, they have the status of independent nations, independent states, which means in the General Assembly, when there'll be as and when there'll be voting, then these states will have one vote which will be equal to any powerful or poor state. Okay, so these were the neutralized and the non-typical states. Will just in brief, we'll see what are the general rights and duties of states. These are the following, usually the rights of the state: right to independence, right to territorial jurisdiction, right to equality, right of self-defense. Remember, if as per Article 1 of the Montevideo Convention, a state, if it possesses all the four qualifications, which means if a state has a permanent population, if it has a defined territory, if it has a government, and if it has the common, capacity to enter into relationship with other states, then automatically these rights are available under international law to these states. Right to independence, that state, which means that state is independent. Then right to territorial jurisdiction, whatever happens in that territory of that particular state, it has exclusive power to decide and deal with the matter. Right to equality. These states will be considered as equal. We have also already seen this. This is called the right of sovereign equality of the state. Right? No matter how small, no matter how big a state is, all states in the eyes of international law are equal. Then there exists a right of self-defense. If you see Article 51 of the UN Charter, it provides that nothing shall impair an inherent right of self-defense, which means the states can use force when it comes to self-defense. So self-defense are the matter is the right of the every state. Then these are the general rights and duties of the state. These are the duties of the state mainly. There are many duties as compared to the rights. Duty to sorry, excuse me. And all these duties, in some form or the other, are now being treated as the customary international law again. So duties to refrain from intervention, as I said earlier, duty to refrain from formatting civil strife in other states, duty to respect for human rights and fundamental human freedoms, duty to ensure international peace, which is the mandate of the UN Charter itself, duty to settle disputes through peaceful means. If you see Article 31 of the UN Charter, it talks about the settlement of dispute through peaceful means, and there are so many means of settling the dispute peacefully. For example, goodwill, office goodwill, and arbitration, and there are so many methods which we'll see in the separate chapter. Then you also have duty to refrain from resorting to war. The After World War I and II, the international community and the UN was very much firm and determined not to repeat the same mistake which it had done, and that's the reason it has prescribed a duty to refrain from resorting to war. Then duty to refrain from giving assistance to states which are indulging in war. So it is the duty of the states which are not directly into the participation of any hostilities, so they cannot give any kind of assistance to the states, those who are already involved. Then duty to refrain from recognizing territorial acquisition, which means if any state deliberately acquires or illegally acquires any of the territory that belongs to the other state, it is the duty of all other states not to recognize such a kind of acquisition. This you must have studied in the topic called recognition. Okay, then there comes the duty to carry out obligations in good faith, duty to conduct a relationship with other states. This duty to conduct relationship with other state is all about international law. Then there are some economic rights and duties of the state. These are the economic rights available to the states. Right to choose its economic system. It could choose any economic model for its own development. And then permanent sovereignty over the natural resources. Whatever the natural resources that are there in the state, available in the state jurisdiction, they are automatically they will belong to the state. Then right to engage in international trade. Uh, equal right of every state is being prescribed in the international law so that they could participate in international trade, and right to associate with producer organization. This is also one of the economic important rights that you have. Then the next one is the right to participate in international decision making process in the economic matters mainly. So for this all economic purposes, we have a separate international UN wing. It is called World Trade Organization. World Trade Organization do prescribe the economic rights and duties. There are multiple treaties which a member state can be member to become a member and take benefit of the same. Okay. Then last not the least is these are the economic duties of the state. Just because you are state, you cannot just only enjoy the rights, you also have to perform certain duties. So these are the economic duties that every state must perform. Duty of promotion and liberalization of the free world. Every state must liberalize its economy and allow the foreign members, the foreign dealers, businessmen to come and establish their businesses. And they should also promote such kind of activities, which will liberalize the world trade. Okay. Then duty of utilization of the resources released by disarmament. This is also one of the important duties which has been prescribed. Duties of most favored nation treatment. Then suppose MFN treatment has been given to one particular state, then it is your duty to abide by the same. These are all the terms of WTO agreements, you see. And then last on the list is duty of worldwide community agreements. This is also one of the important um, duty that a state could be a party to, right? So I think the states in general, this is the last slide as per my knowledge. The states in general chapter has been over. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Any questions, please? Your unit, which is which says that states in general are there in your syllabus, is over. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. No questions? I cannot hear you, please. This is unit. This is your unit number 4. Okay, so unit number 4 is over. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. No questions, anyone?
Sir, I didn't have any questions, sir. I just wanted to know that if you can share these PPT in the group, sir, in the WhatsApp group.
Yeah, I will do that. Mm, but not immediately. Let me just finish all the units which I'm interested to finish, and then I'll put at once in one. I'll
Okay, sir.
create a link, and I can put the study material at there.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So thank you so much. We'll end the class today a little early, and tomorrow we'll begin with the states in general topic. Can we have another class in the evening, please, if you don't mind? 7 7 p.m. or something.
Okay, sir.
No, I want to know the opinion of all the people. or leave it. We'll have tomorrow only. Okay. We'll have tomorrow class same time 11:30 wherein we'll be discussing the topic of states, and you see the state territory. What does it mean included in the state territory? And right away we'll start with the topic of the law of the sea, which is again very much interesting. So I thank you so much, everybody, for listening to my class, and I'll see you tomorrow by 11:30. Okay, all the best. And if you have any questions, you can reserve your questions and ask me in the next class as well. Okay, so thank you so much. I'll see you soon.
Thank you,
tomorrow.
sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.